It's on. Good afternoon, everyone. Anyone with us? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. There is life in the room. Welcome to this beautiful venue at the International Journalism Festival in Perugia for what promises to be a very necessary conversation. My name is Vera Pineda, and I am the Director of Programs and Impact at the European Journalism Center. We are a nonprofit that supports, develops, and strengthens journalism across Europe. It is my absolute privilege to be here today to steer a conversation between some heavyweights of investigative journalism and cross-border collaboration. I would like to start by asking our panelists, Laurent Richard, Miranda Patrusic, and Bastian Obermeier, to introduce themselves and the organizations where they work. Can we start with you, Laurent?
Well, thank you. Hi, everyone. So my name is Laurent Richard. I'm the founder and the executive director of Forbidden Stories. And so Forbidden Stories is a non-profit based in France, but we are a global network, and our mission is to continue the work of assassinated, under threat, or jailed reporters, and we do that in a collaborative way.
Hi all, my name is Miranda Patrusic. I'm editor-in-chief of the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. My microphone works. And OCCRP is the largest global investigative newsroom. We have a staff of 200 and reporters and editors from Sydney all the way to Argentina. So massive team, great team. We produce about 150 investigations a year.
Hey, my name is Bastian Obermeier, and after many years at Süddeutsche Zeitung, I founded our own very small newsroom called Paper Trail Media that I'm leading with my friend and colleague Frederik Obermeier, who is not my brother, and we're not married, we just bear the same last name. And we're now working mainly for Der Spiegel and ZDF in Germany. And we do a lot of work with you guys from OCCRP and Forbidden Stories. We were already on board of the Daphne project, the first project Laurent started after our colleague Daphne Caruana Galizia got murdered in Malta.
Thank you. And for our final speaker, may need little introduction for many of you, Dmitry Muratov is the editor-in-chief of Novaya Gazeta and the winner, alongside Maria Ressa, of the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. He started as a journalist for Soviet newspapers, and after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, he co-founded Novaya Gazeta, a newspaper that became a leading advocate for democracy and freedom of expression in Russia. Under Muratov's leadership, Novaya Gazeta has criticized the Russian authorities for corruption, electoral fraud, and human rights violations. 6 of its journalists have been murdered after writing critical articles on Russian military operations in Chechnya and the Caucasus, including Anna Politkovskaya. And in September 2023, Dmitry was declared by the Russian authorities to be a foreign agent. Dmitry is currently in Russia and couldn't join us here, but he has shared in a recent pre-recorded interview about the current context in the country following the re-election of Putin, Alexei Navalny's death, and how Russian journalists in exile are contributing their work. So your attention, please, to the video.
Очень положительно. Этот результат очевиден всем. Какие результаты были достигнуты в результате этой избирательной кампании? Кандидата, который придерживался позиции мира, он был снят с выборов. Медиа были закрыты, в дискуссиях публичных президент Путин, кандидат Путин не участвовал, наблюдателей на выборы не допустили. Что и доказывает, что возможен без наблюдателей, без медиа и без кандидатов возможен результат почти что 88%. Не бывает какой-то одной модели поведения. Навальный сделал такой выбор. Давайте каждый человек будет выбирать для себя то, на что он способен. Я был защитником в суде по делу председателя запрещенного в России мемориала, лауреата Нобелевской премии Олега Орлова. Перед третьим судом я уговаривал Олега Орлова покинуть Россию, потому что его посадят в тюрьму. Сначала я наливал ему водки. Это не помогло. Потом мы ругались. Потом я взял в союзники жену Олега Орлова, Татьяну. Не помогла ни водка, ни жена, ни ссора. Орлов остался в России, получил 2 года 6 месяцев тюрьмы, и сейчас он находится в тюрьме. Я не согласен с этим, но я уважаю его убеждения. Мне все время, Лаурен, говорят, вот ешь только черные ягоды, не ешь красные ягоды. Наша драма заключается в том, что половина наших журналистов уехала и работают в Европе без цензуры, но не внутри страны, а мы работаем внутри страны, но без цензуры. Поэтому читать надо внутри страны, но под цензурой. Поэтому читать надо просто то и другое. Наши читатели попросили, чтобы мы оставались с ними. Мы поддерживаем наших коллег, которые уехали, но поскольку весь народ из России уехать не может, мы тоже остались в России. Однако государство, что в России, что в Китае, что в других странах, завладело интернетом и ведет в нем свою политику. И последние 2 приметы цифровой диктатуры. Всех, кто не согласен, например, все, кто выступает за мир, все, кто выступает против специальной военной операции, их легко находят в сети с помощью специального мониторинга. Цифровые гиганты и мессенджеры не хотят противостоять государственной цензуре. Милитаристская пропаганда нуждается в монополии, и эта монополия в России установлена. Холокост медиа в России завершен. Читатели могут нас читать только через VPN. Я обращаюсь к вам и к вашим коллегам, которые будут на вашей конференции, о том, чтобы вы помогли странам, в которых есть авторитарные и диктаторские режимы, помочь сохранить социальные сети, YouTube, Википедию. Это дело инженеров. Наймите инженеров. Иначе в следующий раз, во время нашего разговора, через короткое время, вместо меня появится вот такой значок. Во-первых, я считаю, что ваша идея гениальная. Мы на вас тоже рассчитываем. To be continued. Я вообще думаю, что журналисты сейчас и журналисты украинские, и журналисты российские, и журналисты в Европе, многие из них доказали, что они преданы своей профессии, ее стандартам, и они продолжают в тяжелейших условиях выполнять свою миссию. Я горжусь своими коллегами. Они противостоят диктатурам, они противостоят пропаганде, они противостоят новому фашизму. Получилось так, что для журналистов свобода слова является высочайшей ценностью, а для обществ в наших странах свобода слова находится на 5-м, 7-м, 15-м месте. Люди говорят, что им важна безопасность, борьба с коррупцией и уровень жизни. Понимаете, мы не смогли объяснить людям, что без свободы слова коррупцию не победить, безопасности не достичь, и уровень жизни будет падать. И у меня осталась последняя надежда на вашу конференцию, что вы справитесь с этой задачей.
As you could see, Dimitri keeps his spirits high despite the hostile environment which he lives in and works in, and this is nothing short of admirable. I'm sure he will appreciate this warm reaction to his comments, but more than that, as you could see from the assignment he gave us, Dimitri asks journalists in exile and relies especially on journalists operating in countries where freedom of the press is a reality to continue the work of those that are silenced, threatened, attacked, or murdered. And to bring us a little bit into context before we start our conversations and the questions, attacks on journalists' lives and liberty remained at near record levels in 2023, with the Committee to Protect Journalists documenting 99 journalists killed worldwide, the highest total since 2015. And in what goes of this year, in 2024, over 100 journalists have already been killed in Gaza. Not all these journalists were caught in the crossfire or reporting from war zones like Gaza and Ukraine. Those who were killed last year were killed in the Philippines, in Myanmar, India, Cameroon, Honduras, and even in the US. The media is under attack worldwide, and several reports tells us as a result of rampant impunity for crimes against the press, journalists around the globe continue to be targeted for their watchdog work. Authoritarian regimes from Afghanistan to China deploy a range of tactics, including censorship, intimidation, harassment, and imprisonment to instill a climate of fear. Private tech companies are amplifying their threats with unaccountable policies and practices that give governments vast and unchecked surveillance and censorship powers. Media outlets are increasingly vulnerable to capture by political and commercial interests. Additionally, legislation ostensibly aimed at combating terrorism or cybercrime is being weaponized to suppress independent journalism. So this is the current reality, and these threats are not only confined to autocratic regimes. Journalists in democracies are also facing increased harassment and interference in their work. This panel will share how in this challenging scenario, collaborative journalism has shown time and again to be a solution to face an increasingly hostile environment for press freedom. They have been pioneers in transforming investigative journalism from an area for lone wolves to a craft that requires collaboration. And this is how they have succeeded in finishing the work of murdered or silenced journalists and stand up to corruption and environmental crimes against many odds. So, the Baku connection, an investigation we are going to talk about next, an investigation into the abuses of powerful Aliyev regime in Azerbaijan, was published in February and is one such case of the investigations by Forbidden Stories. So I would like to start with you, Laurent. Can you tell us a bit more about the Baku connection, how this is an investigation in Azerbaijan land with Forbidden Stories, and why did you decide to pursue the work of the journalists who have been imprisoned?
Actually, last November, late November, 4 journalists from Absas Media, that is a news organization based in Baku in Azerbaijan, that is a dictatorship, were arrested one by one in a few days. And we knew them. We met even some weeks before in another conference during the GIGC in Sweden. We met in Paris as well, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before their arrest. And the editor, as she was in Turkey at that time, she was about to board in a plane to go back to Baku, where it's the director of the organization have been just arrested, and we discussed a little bit together, and she told me that they were, of course, arrested because of their stories. and they asked us to continue their work. So that's most of the starting point of any investigation of forbidden stories, start like that, with the killing of someone or with the arrest of someone, and with the need to continue the work. And so this is what we did with the Baku connection, and right after that we discussed with Miranda, with Bastien, about how to team up together, plus with other news organizations to continue their work. Continuing their work is crucial, because it's not only, it's crucial first for the public opinion in Azerbaijan, but not only. Azerbaijan is a country that is well known for corrupting European institutions, MEPs. It's a well-known country who is selling a lot of oil and gas to many states in the world, who has a lot of influence and who is able to corrupt many people at the same time. And so that's a powerful country who has a lot of influence in the West. In the meantime, inside the country, they are jailing opponents, human rights activists, journalists for a long time, and OCCRP did a lot of reports on that from a very long time. And so the Baku connection the goal of the Baku connection was clear. Let's continue the work of our friends over there. And so we decided to team up and to precisely investigate different cases of stories that they were investigating. There were one story that we did about a gold mine over there that was polluting the area. People were protesting about that, and they were repressed, they were arrested, and journalists who were trying to cover the protests over there in this area were arrested as well. Another story that we did was to investigate how the EU institutions were providing grants and basically millions of euros to the penitentiary system in Baku, in Azerbaijan, officially to improve the management of the prisons in Azerbaijan. And of course, Azerbaijan is well known for violation of human rights, including, of course, in prison, where there are a lot of cases of torture who have been already documented. So we try to question the European institution about that. And that's where a collaboration is needed. We need that kind of collaboration, first because it brings more protection. It doesn't make sense to kill a journalist, to arrest a journalist if we are 40, 50 to team up together. It brings resources as well. And for that one, we needed resources to understand what was happening in Azerbaijan, but as well to investigate the millions that were sent from Europe to there. So we were questioning the authorities as well. And that happened in a time, late November, early December, where right after the arrest of the journalist of Absas Media, Ilham Aliyev, the president, were announcing some snap election. And so he did organize a snap election, and of course he won the election again and again, like his father was winning election with more than 80% of vote. And of course the fraud over there is well documented. So this is how we did the Baku connection, and we published that, and of course we will be continuing to work on that because they are still in jail. And so why we do that? We do that first to make sure people will get access to the stories. That's the first goal. And the second one is to show to the enemies of the free press, to Ilham Aliyev and to the other one, that is a very counterproductive idea to silence a journalist, because at the end that will be on the front page of many newspapers at the same time, that the story they wanted to silence will be precisely and massively exposed everywhere.
Such an amazing work to amplify the voices of journalists that suddenly cannot finish their story. And I would ask you, in the beginning, of course, all the team of Absas Media was imprisoned. So how did you reach out to them to continue the work? And how did you get their trust? How do you get them to trust on a team of international journalists they never met before, that are not from their country and suddenly are offering to continue their work?
Well, on the first part of your question, we were first initially discussing. We knew them already. We discussed with them. We discussed with their lawyers. Absas Media were making as well public the need to have other foreign-based news organizations to continue the work of the journalists over there. And the question of the trust is a key trust in our collaborative journalism model. It's how to share some information. When you are a journalist, usually you have been trained to become a lone wolf reporter. You have been trained to work alone, to never share, especially with other reporters, and we do precisely the opposite. We share with other reporters because we think we will be stronger in that way. So the question of the trust is key, and I think more and more journalists at risk are able to see, thanks to those kind of collaboration with OCCRP, with The Guardian, with the Washington Post, with Paper Trail, that the kind of revelation and investigation and the seriousness of all of that, and the more we are publishing, the more we can get some trust and have some trustworthy relationship with people, to convince as well that facing that kind of threats, we need to be a global network. The kind of threat we are facing now are so organized, whether it's about cyber surveillance, disinformation, physical safety, everything, everything is very organized. So we need to be organized ourselves as well in the kind of response we can offer to that.
Very good. 2 tips right there already. 1, do not hold on to your information if you're an investigative journalist, and at least try to share that with someone you trust, even if in the beginning it's just your editor. And organization and collaboration is essential against bad actors who are usually very well organized, very well funded as well. And I would like to continue with you, Miranda. Many of the journalists OCCRP works with, just like the ones from Abza's Media, around the globe, they face threats and danger. What type of relationship do you establish with these journalists in the course of the reporting that Forbidden Stories does, but also in terms of legal, security, or even emotional, mental health support?
Thank you. Before I talk about what we do at OCCRP, I do want to emphasize how important what Forbidden Stories is doing. There's so many journalists around the world who are not part of the network. You know, they sit in a small newsroom. Sometimes they're lone wolves working on a very dangerous stories where they don't have a security training, they don't have a support. And the idea that, you know, you can put your information out there for somebody to finish a story is a very important deterrent for anybody contemplating of killing or doing something to a journalist. Really, really important, and I think we need to do even more to spread the message of this mechanism and get more people in remote areas engaged, you know, to take this as a safety mechanism. You know, for OCCRP, I have to say that I'm getting better. It's such a big need. You know, full-time job, and we're still feeling like we're not able to address all the security needs all the time. We also have a big cybercrime team. Several of our journalists have been repeatedly targeted by Pegasus, especially our journalists in Middle East. This was an investigation, you know, we were very lucky to work with Forbidden Stories and report about it, show it. It continues to happen. You know, we are continuously monitoring devices of our reporters to catch when they're targeted. We are doing a lot of training. You know, 10 years ago, I went to London and I was part of the first group of OCCRP reporters and editors who had a counter-surveillance training. And I remember, you know, as we were learning how to follow the people and how to detect if we were followed, I felt like I was, you know, part of, you know, sci-fi mission. You know, going to Mars, like, why am I learning to figure out if I'm being followed? Well, since then, we have done many more trainings like that. You know, we've just recently did one in Latin America, and the need is greater than we can actually, you know, afford to do. You know, we still have a lot of our journalists in our network that didn't have it. You know, the number of times we are running these missions and sending staff to determine who is following our reporters is increasing. And, you know, we had to temporarily move a number of our journalists. You know, just recently, actually last week, we moved one of the journalists from one of the European countries, actually, to another place to basically, you know, because, you know, she had a surveillance on her. it really speaks of the danger of the work, and also it speaks of, need for safety of journalists. With that, OCCRP, again, I think we are very lucky, but also not just lucky. I think, a lot of organizations in the world are not as aware of the need for safety and need for mechanism to protect their journalists. I've heard countless times where, somebody would say, I went on a reporting trip and I told my editor, check in with me, in a day or two if you don't hear from me. And, the editor would see a message and respond 3 days later. So it speaks of lack of awareness of the need. One of the first questions, I ask anybody who has a story idea, what is the risk? Because I know that the only way I can protect the journalist is if we are aware of the risk, if we can craft a reporting strategy to mitigate the risks. I know that in countries like Central Asia, I actually don't send reporters to do interviews. We send people from abroad to do it. In some places, nobody knows who our journalist is. It's just too dangerous. Their family members would be jailed. They themselves could be jailed or killed. It's the world we live in. It's important to bring the story. We want to expose a corruption, but I cannot do that with the reporters in exile or reporters who are killed or jailed. Final thought, we spend a lot of effort basically providing psychological support. I remember times, like part of my career, I've reported about organized crime in Montenegro. There was one time where, somebody approached me and said, you'll be dead. And, to be honest, in the very first moment, I didn't even realize it. And then I called my editor and you have to get out of the country immediately. And he organized, me to leave the country. And I remember how traumatic that experience is, days later, just thinking, actually I'm mortal, As journalists, we report about these high-level figures and we're not even thinking like something can happen with us. And, so this is the reason why, CCRP actually has a contracted company which, reporters can go and talk to and editors can go talk to as they're going through different things. And obviously part of the awareness of the editor is to understand basically if somebody is going through a very difficult situation and basically provide the support, and we are actively looking into this.
Thank you for that. So more recommendations for everyone who is starting investigative journalism or already working on stories. Training, there's not enough of it, digital security, and of course other technical training like counter-surveillance, but also considering risk assessments, finding someone to share, exchange notes with and share about your story before you go into the field. And Miranda, you mentioned, of course, a lot of threats there. Can you tell us a little bit about the most common types of profile, of these people working the dark side, let's say, threatening journalists?
If I think about all the stories that we've done, part of it is, governments. We just now, with Forbidden Stories and other partners, we've done a campaign to free 12 Kyrgyz journalists who were arrested. And this is basically government actors who are doing it. It's not, a subject you would think of like, organized crime or businessmen with a lot of money. So in a number of countries, it's basically government who's your enemy. They don't recognize the public service we do by holding the officials to account and, flagging the wrongdoings. In other parts of the world, it's businessmen, very powerful. Probably one of the saddest stories is the murder of Jan Kuciak, a Slovakian journalist who was basically, targeted because of his reporting on a major businessman there. And, in addition to, a slap lawsuit, the businessmen also have in their arsenal basically, surveillance companies or, reputation laundering companies who are basically targeting our journalists. And then there's a whole element of organized crime. In some countries, to be honest, what we're seeing is that there is such a strong connection between organized crime and the government. And, you think you're threatened by the organized crime, but you're also threatened by the, rogue government officials.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So beware of government, political actors, organized crime, and also business interests, very well-funded business interests. And now I'd continue with you, Bastian, please. The investigation, the Baku connection, involved 40 journalists from 15 countries. Are the investigations you work in usually this big? I cannot imagine the logistical complexities of bringing together 40 journalists from 15 countries. Must be a real challenge.
Well, actually, that one wasn't that big. We all did larger ones. The Panama Papers, we had nearly 400 colleagues, and we worked more than a year. But the Baku, we had to be really fast in this case because we knew the election would be coming up in February, and we wanted to have a story or a number of stories by then. So we needed to be really fast. We needed to. We met in Paris, where we could really divide the work, and we could say who would do which story, who would do which job, and then we could all swarm out and try to get the interviews and the information and the digging to be ready for the publication before the elections in Azerbaijan, which then helped us to get a better audience, because this is, something, if you tell the people we found this and that and this, and it's really important because next week he's going to get re-elected, maybe with 89%, maybe 85%, whatever. We know that ahead time, right? Because it's not a real election. And that's a really good moment to have that story.
And how did you keep everyone pulling into the same direction during the investigation?
I mean, that was luckily not my job, but the job of fantastic colleagues at Forbidden Stories. And what they do is they have a lot of contact. Like, they go back to the people in the countries, they ask, do you need help? What about this? What about that idea? Then we have a terrible number of signal groups. Like, we all probably in 159 signal groups, and it keeps beeping all the time. But you have to follow the relevant ones so that you know what's going on, and they might need your help, they might need your reaction. So it's a hard job, but it's really done fantastic by Forbidden Stories, also by OCCRP in many other cases. It's just the new way of doing those kinds of investigations. You don't do that alone anymore. You're not a lone wolf anymore. You can't do an investigation that's related to 9 countries on your own. That's just nonsense and crazy, and you won't get the results that we all need.
Tell us a little bit more about those results, right? Because what are truly the reasons for not going at it alone, and holding on to the story, working, jumping into this huge undertaking and not keeping the story for your media outlet, reserve the scoop for your media outlet?
I mean, there are so many reasons for not going alone, because so first of all, the risk, right? So they might kill one journalist, but they can't kill 50 or 100 journalists. So that's one very legit reason to do this kind of investigation, because the story is not going to die, and they're going to see that. They are the ones on the other side. And then you're going to have way more impact if Der Spiegel, which is really a big news outlet, if Der Spiegel is publishing a story only in Germany about a certain case, that's not going to have a huge impact. But if Le Monde and The Guardian and OCCRP, if they all publish one and the same story at the same time, this is like boom. And you have the audience for maybe a day, right? And they're going to listen. And this can really bring change. And that's what we're all going to do. And there are so many more. I mean, you meet fantastic new colleagues. You have worked for years, because they all will come back to you. So if you shared a story with, 100 colleagues from around the world, and they got a good story with a lead to Germany, they're going to call you. So it pays back. That's also like a very selfish way to think about that. But most of it is you need many people to follow many leads to get a strong story. You need sources in countries where you don't have sources. I mean, I don't even speak French really well. So if you need someone in that country, you need someone with boots on the ground. And that's, you know, with OCCRP, I don't know in how many countries you got boots on the ground, probably 150 or what. So that's fantastic. And then you have a really good team and you can really reach something.
Okay, so very strong arguments to prefer collaborative investigative journalism to more traditional ways of doing investigations, being the impact, one of them, the strong international impact, and of course also protection of a network of journalists, being able to publish in many languages. I would follow up with a question for you, Laurent, because these stories, like how did you make a story set in Azerbaijan relevant in other countries? How do you make local stories, how do you make the audiences see their global importance, or the other way around?
Yeah, that's sometimes the most challenging question. And sometimes our role at Forbidden Stories is to go to the partners and to pitch a project. And sometimes partners would think that the story is so far away from their audience. So that's a key question, because we want to have a global impact. But not only that, actually the way we think about the stories is we start from a local stories to go to a global issue, a global conversation. About the Baku connection, that was very simple. It's a dictatorship that is selling oil and gas to many countries, that is corrupting many people, and they cannot do that alone. So they do have many ally friends in cooperation who are based in our countries as well. So there is a link. When we were continuing the work of Regina Martinez, who was killed in Mexico, she was investigating the corruption of a governor who was corrupted by the Sinaloa drug cartels, who was selling and who is still selling cocaine in more than 56 countries. So it's not only a Mexican story, that's a French story, that's a German story as well. And I think the worst thing is to be used to that kind of metrics when you you wake up in the morning and you listen to a radio show and you hear that, you are listening that a new Mexican journalist have been killed. Another journalist in Azerbaijan have been jailed. Another journalist in Philippines have been killed. And so the more and more you get used to that kind of statistics, metrics, it becomes a kind of index. And that's the worst situation we can be. Because those stories matters not only for the Mexican, but for us as well. When Gary Lankesh in India was investigating the disinformation industry, she was trying to investigate what was the connection between some website and the BJP, the national party that is in power over there, and who were spreading disinformation against her and many other journalists. She was trying to investigate that. She was killed for that. So we start the project Story Killers in India about this information network to investigate the mercenaries behind and to investigate the industry of this information. But that industry is global. It's the disinformation, providing this information as a services, as many private corporations are doing now for state actors, is a global business. In Brazil, in Africa, in many parts of the world. So we team up with 100 reporters to investigate that, and at the end we were able to reveal the existence of a private company called Team Roré, was based in Israel and was behind the manipulation of dozens of elections. And they were doing some hack and leak operation, they were manipulating the public opinion, they were former Cambridge Analytica people. So those things were only discovered thanks to that kind of collaborative network. One team was investigating undercover that office in that company. Another team based in London from the Guardian team was able to identify formally the guy who was leading that as a former Cambridge Analytica people. So that can only be achieved thanks to that kind of network, and all start in India. So this is the way we try to shape the project as well. to make sure that at the end we can raise awareness about those main topics that are the most dangerous one. And if we want to change some things about climate change or other things, we need to get information. And so I think the collaborative model is the best answer to do that.
Thank you. And finally, because we will have time for questions from the audience, let's reserve 10 minutes. So I have one final question for all of you, and I ask you to be very brief, please, in responding. Going back to the point that Dimitri made in his video, right? He says that for the audiences, for communities, for people in general, sometimes freedom of the press does not rank as high as personal security, and they don't see the fight for corruption or human rights as important. So do you think that this collaborative investigative journalism is the best strategy to show people that freedom of the press should rank higher in their priorities, and how so? Perhaps for Bastian first.
Well, it's hard to tell someone in another country how they should think about the freedom of the press, right? So I think it's kind of obvious that if you want to have control of the power and the powerful people, you need a free press. If you don't care about that, you don't need a free press. So, it's that easy sometimes. I think it's very important for every kind of government to have a valid control, and that's why I am, with everything that I believe in, I believe we all need a free press in every country.
And Miranda?
I'll say that corruption and organized crime are exported very easily. I think the reason why we need collaboration is that, crime in Russia, corruption in Russia heavily affects all the countries around the world. Just the public is not always aware, because people think, what do I have to do with this country? Or what do I have to do with, a country I've never heard of? I don't know who anybody is. And then with that, by raising, awareness of the impact that the corruption have, I think we will raise awareness why it is important to have watchdogs. Because if you don't have a watchdog, all that Azerbaijan has is, large amounts of money that it's using to basically bribe officials, it's using to, buy support in the West, and nobody can say, well, hey, there's something wrong in this country. So that's why we need free press and we need collaboration, because we need to be aware of what's going on, otherwise we are in darkness.
Thank you. And Laura?
No, just quickly about that. It's without access to information, we cannot, for instance, save the planet. Everyone here will say, every government will say, we have to fight climate change, we have to save the planet. But journalists are killed because when they try to investigate environmental crimes. So without knowing what that multinational is doing in Guatemala, for instance, and how much they have polluted that lake, and how much the fisherman community is dying from that, we cannot save the planet. So we need information, and we know what is happening in country without access of information. It's black hole. So I think there is a big distrust, of course, between the public opinion and the journalists. I think there is a lot of confusion as well between what is an information, what is an opinion. I think that, of course, the social network and the algorithm are playing against us as well in where we are now. But definitely, I think as well, and to finish on that, that journalism is the best way to defend journalism. Most of the time, the killers, the people who are jailing Khadija Ismailova in Azerbaijan, most of the time they don't care too much about statement. We need statement, we need advocacy, and that's important to do that. But I think what they are much more afraid is having their own crimes exposed. And if we do that kind of journalism in a collaborative way, we can have an impact.
Thank you so much. And with this, we have questions already. That's great. There's no time for questions? Oh, I am so sorry. I'm terrible sorry about that. Can we allow it just one question?
Michael, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for organizing Baku Connections job. It's very important for
I'm truly sorry, but
imprisoned colleagues' job. But how it's possible to bring our colleagues back from the prison because you mentioned you able to establish informal coalitions to continue their work. But Azerbaijan hosted this year COP29, Climate Change Conference, which is supposed to attend thousands of journalists, 75,000 representatives, 150 heads of the state. But journalist community, international journalist community, still not provide enough solidarity for human rights violations, victims, for imprisoned journalists, imprisoned climate rights defenders, and others. How it's possible to establish using your networking opportunities to raise awareness using this COP29 to push to Aliyev, because he's using this COP29 not because he cares about climate change, because he cares about whitewashing his toxic and corrupt background. Could you please give us more support on this direction?
Unfortunately, I'll have to cut here because we are asked to leave the room. So perhaps
I can just
you just
quickly answer. For sure, the COP29 will be interesting to see how governments are reacting, how they are going there, and to see how journalists are reacting to that as well. Definitely what we are doing at Forbidden Stories is to raise awareness by publishing stories that were silenced by Azerbaijan, for instance. And our stories are not only about journalists, it's about corruption, it's about human rights activists who have been jailed as well. And so we do that for this, making sure people are aware of that.